The dust swirled with a mean spirit, the same spirit that lived in the narrowed eyes of the townsfolk as Sarah Jane Washington stepped down from the rickety stagecoach, her worldly possessions a single carpet bag and a wool harder than the parched earth. She did not ask for welcome, she knew none would be offered. Her claim, a small, forgotten parcel of land west of the creek, was legally hers, bought with coins saved from years of mending other people's lives while her own frayed. The land was rock-strewn, sun-baked, unwanted. Like her. From his porch, miles distant but with a clear view across the undulating plains, Jedediah Thorne watched the small figure alight. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, missed little. He'd seen the stage, an infrequent visitor. He saw the woman, dark against the pale grass, her solitude a mirror to his own. He was a man of long silences, his words sparse, buried with his Martha and their boy years ago. The ranch was his world, the cattle his congregation, the wind his only confidant. He watched her measure the land, her movements economical, deliberate. He saw her unpack a few tools, their edges glinting dully in the harsh sun. The town of Redemption, nestled in the valley below like a judgmental fist, had already begun to whisper. He'd heard snippets when he'd gone for supplies, his biannual pilgrimage. A woman alone colored what she thinks she's doing. The questions were accusations. Jedediah said nothing then, said nothing now. He just watched. The first log was a torment. Sarah Jane, she preferred to be called Ebony now, a name she'd chosen for faith, wrestled it from the sparse clutch of trees near the creek bed. It was too heavy, too awkward. The sun beat down. Her hands, calloused from labor but not this labor, bled. She did not cry out. She did not look for help. She set her jaw, and the log moved, an inch, then another. Each movement was a prayer, a protest. The wind, it seemed to carry the scent of her struggle to Jedediah's porch. Or perhaps it was just the dust. He noted the angle of the sun, the strain in her silhouette. He thought of Martha, her hands in the garden, strong and capable. A pang, familiar and sharp. He turned back into the cool dimness of his house, the silence pressing in. Ebony worked until the light failed, then worked by the sliver of a moon. The town slept under its blanket of righteousness. She did not. The foundation, a crude outline of stones, was her first victory. She laid her bedroll within it, the earth her mattress, the stars her indifferent ceiling. She was building not just a cabin, but a boundary. A place where their whispers could not reach, where their judgment could not touch. Jedediah saw the faint flicker of her small fire, a defiant spark in the vast darkness. He wondered if she had enough water, if she knew about the wolves that sometimes roamed. He did not act. He only watched, a sentinel of sorrow, his own past a cabin built of grief, its door long sealed. The longing, he'd thought it buried deep. But watching her, a solitary woman carving out a space in a world that wished her gone, it stirred, a faint, uncomfortable warmth in the frozen landscape of his heart. It wasn't for a wife, not precisely. It was for something to tend to, something to protect, something that might, against all odds, flourish. The days bled into a week, then two. Ebony's routine was brutal, unchanging. Dawn brought the aching stretch of muscles, the renewed attack on timber. The sun climbed, a merciless overseer. She felled saplings, stripped them, dragged them. Her movements, once hesitant, gained a desperate rhythm. The townsfolk, when they passed on the distant track to their own softer lives, would sometimes stop, point. Their words, even unheard, felt like stones thrown. Jedediah saw it all. He saw the sweat that plastered her simple dress to her back, the way she'd pause, head bowed, before hefting another log. He saw the dwindling pile of her supplies. He remembered Martha rationing flour during that first hard winter. He began to leave his porch earlier, stay later. His chores around the ranch felt automated, his mind elsewhere, fixed on that small, struggling figure. One morning, Ebony found a sharp, welded axe leaning against the half-hewn log she'd abandoned in exhaustion the night before. It was not her axe, hers was chipped, the handle loose. This one felt balanced, hungry for wood. She looked around. The plains stretched empty, indifferent. His ranch, a distant smudge on the horizon, showed no sign of life. Suspicion warred with need. She picked it up. The steel bit into the wood with a satisfying thud, a clean cut. Work that had taken an hour took minutes. She did not look towards his ranch. She did not offer thanks to the empty air. She simply worked, the new axe an extension of her will. A few days later, a bundle of thick, cured hides appeared near her woodpile, the kind good for sealing gaps against the wind. Then, a small sack of dried beans and smoked meat. Always placed where she would find them, never a sign of the giver. Imani accepted these offerings with the same stoic silence. Her shame, a constant companion, receded slightly. It was not charity, she told herself. It was an exchange. For her defiance. For her presence, which broke the monotony of the plains. The walls of her cabin rose, log by painful log. They were uneven, a testament to her solitary effort, but they were strong. She began to sing, low humming tunes from a life before, melodies of resilience. The sound, fragile, barely carried on the wind, but Jedediah, his hearing honed by years of listening to the land, sometimes caught it. It was a sound Martha had made, humming as she churned butter. The comparison was unwelcome, yet it persisted. The town's animosity festered. Preacher Thorne, a man whose piety was a cudgel, spoke from the pulpit of unsettling influences and godless endeavors so close to righteous folk. Mrs. Gable, the self-appointed guardian of redemption's morals, spread tales of witchcraft, of a woman who communed with dark spirits in the wilderness. No good woman would live so, she'd pronounce at the general store, her voice carrying. Jedediah heard the talk. It was a venom he knew well, the same kind that had isolated him after Martha's passing, whispers that he was cursed, that sorrow had unhinged him. His silence had been his shield then. Now, it felt like a failing. He watched Imani patch the chinks in her walls with mud and straw, her small figure dwarfed by the structure she was creating. It was more than a cabin. It was a monument to endurance. And he, the silent watcher, was becoming an unwilling accomplice to its creation. His longing deepened, shifted. It was no longer a vague ache for a lost past, but a specific, gnawing concern for this woman, this stranger who asked for nothing, yet needed so much. He saw her mend her torn dress by firelight, her fingers deft. He saw her share a piece of her scant bread with a stray coyote pup, a small act of kindness in a world that offered her none. He was a widower, yes. But more than that, he was a man witnessing a quiet battle, and the urge to intervene, to offer more than just tools and scraps, grew with each rising log. The cabin walls were up, a crooked but sturdy square against the vastness. Imani had begun to lay the beams for the roof, a task that mocked her solitary strength. She'd hoist one end, prop it, then strain to lift the other, only to have the first slip. Frustration, a cold, bitter wave, threatened to drown her. She sat, head in her hands, the silence of the plains pressing in, amplifying her inadequacy. The next morning, the problematic beam was secured, braced by a length of new rope, the kind used on Jedediah's ranch. Beside it lay a small, carved bird, whittled from a piece of scrapwood, its form simple but evocative of flight, of freedom. Imani picked it up. Her fingers, rough and calloused, traced its smooth lines. For the first time, she looked directly towards the distant ranch, a long, steady gaze. No figure was visible. She placed the bird on a small ledge inside her cabin, a silent acknowledgement. Jedediah, watching through his spyglass, a relic of his brief time as a scout, saw her look. He lowered the glass, his heart thumping a slow, unfamiliar rhythm. He had crossed a line from passive observer to active participant, however covert. The risk felt enormous, yet necessary. The town's murmurings grew louder, more pointed. Deputy Miller, a young man eager to prove his worth and easily swayed by the likes of Preacher Thorne, rode out to Imani's cabin. He was polite but firm. Folks are concerned. A woman alone. It ain't seemly. Imani stood in the doorway of her unfinished home, her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. I own this land, deputy. My papers are in order. Her voice was low, steady, devoid of fear or supplication. I trouble no one. Some say you're being aided, Miller pressed, glancing towards Jedediah's distant ranch. That recluse Thorn, his estranged one. Emoni's expression didn't change. I aid myself, deputy. With God's help, and these two hands. Miller, uncomfortable under her direct stare, eventually mumbled something about keeping the peace and retreated, his mission unfulfilled but the town's suspicion confirmed. They were now linked in the town's narrative, the strange woman and the hermit rancher. Jedediah saw the deputy's visit. He saw Emoni stand her ground. A fierce, protective surge, something he hadn't felt since Martha was threatened by that cougar, tightened his chest. He spent the afternoon sharpening his axe, not for wood, but for readiness. His longing was no longer a gentle ache, it was a sharpened blade, a shield forming around the idea of her, of them, this silent alliance. He started leaving more substantial supplies, a full sack of flour, coffee, even a bar of soap. Once, he left a small, worn book of poetry he'd found amongst Martha's things. He didn't know if she could read, or if she'd care for it, but the impulse was undeniable. Emoni found the book. She opened it, her lips moving silently over the words. That evening, the scent of wood smoke from her chimney carried a new fragrance, baking bread. Jedediah, mending a fence lying closer to her property than he usually ventured, caught the aroma. It was the smell of home, a scent long absent from his own life. He imagined her inside, the firelight casting shadows on the rough log walls, the small wooden bird looking on. The cabin was becoming a sanctuary, not just for her, but in his mind, for a possibility he hadn't dared entertain in years. The possibility of shared warmth, of a quiet presence that didn't demand, but simply was. The wind whispered secrets between their two solitary plots of land, secrets of nascent trust, of shared defiance against a world that understood neither. He was still a widower. She was still a woman building alone. But the space between them, once a chasm of indifference, was now bridged by unseen threads of care and a slowly dawning, unspoken hope. The first snows came early that year, not gentle flakes, but a furious, biting blizzard that swept across the plains with malevolent intent. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at Emoni's partially completed roof, seeking out every chink in her log walls. She had worked tirelessly, but the roof was a patchwork of hides and hope, not yet the solid barrier she needed. The cold gnawed at her, seeping through her worn clothes, chilling her to the bone. Her small fire sputtered, fighting a losing battle against the drafts. Fear, a raw, primal thing, began to coil in her stomach. Jedediah watched the storm gather from his window, his face grim. He knew these blizzards. They were killers. Martha had caught her death in one, caught out checking on a newborn calf. The memory was a fresh stab of pain. He thought of Emoni, alone in that exposed cabin. The supplies he'd left wouldn't be enough against this. His long-held isolation, his vow of non-interference, shattered like ice under a hammer. He pulled on his heaviest coat, his sheepskin gloves, grabbed a lantern and a coil of thick rope. He saddled old Bess, his most steadfast mare, her breath pluming in the frigid air. The wind fought him every step of the way to the barn, and the ride to Emoni's cabin was a battle against a white, roaring beast. He found her huddled by the fire, her face pale, her eyes wide with a quiet terror she tried to conceal. The wind shrieked through the gaps in the roof, flinging snow onto the dirt floor. He didn't speak. Words were useless against the storm's fury. He moved with a grim efficiency, using the rope to secure the loosest hides, stuffing sacking into the worst of the gaps. His hands, though stiff with cold, worked with an old familiarity. Emoni watched him, her initial shock giving way to a dawning realization. He wasn't just a ghost leaving gifts, he was real, solid, a bulwark against the raging elements. When he had done what little he could to fortify the cabin, he turned to her. His face was caked with snow, his eyes intense. "Come," he said, his voice rough from disuse and the cold, the single word a command, an offering. She hesitated. To leave her cabin, her hard-won sanctuary, felt like a defeat. But the storm was a relentless enemy, and the man before her, a stranger who had shown her more kindness than any soul in redemption, offered a lifeline. She nodded, a small, jerky movement. He helped her gather a few precious belongings, the carved bird, the book of poetry, her mother's worn shawl. The journey to his ranch was a brutal ordeal. The wind shrieked, visibility was near zero. He rode ahead, leading her small, borrowed mule he'd brought, shielding her as much as he could from the storm's direct onslaught. Several times, he had to dismount and guide the animals through deep drifts, his own body a windbreak. They arrived at his ranch house, two frozen figures staggering through the snow. Inside, the silence was profound, but it was a silence of shelter, not desolation. The air was cool but still, a blessed relief from the storm's assault. He stoked the fire in the main room's large stone hearth, the flames leaping up, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "Warmth," he said, gesturing towards it. He ladled stew from a pot that had been simmering on the back of the stove into 2 bowls. He handed one to her. They ate in silence, the only sounds the crackling fire and the muffled howl of the wind outside. The stew was hot, savory, filling. Imani felt a thawing begin deep within her, a warmth that spread beyond the physical. His house was stark, utilitarian, yet clean. Martha's presence lingered in the faded curtains, in a meticulously stitched sampler on the wall proclaiming love endures. It was a house that had known love and profound loss. He showed her to a small spare room. "Sleep," he said, then retreated, leaving her to the quiet and the unexpected safety. The storm raged for 2 days. When it finally broke, the world outside was a pristine, silent expanse of white. And then, they saw them. A dark line of figures moving slowly across the snow-covered plains towards the ranch, Preacher Thorne, Deputy Miller, and a half-dozen other men from Redemption, their faces grim, their purpose unmistakable. The delegation from Redemption crunched through the fresh snow, their expressions a mixture of self-righteousness and grim determination. Preacher Thorne led the way, his Bible held like a shield, or perhaps a weapon. Deputy Miller, looking uneasy but resolute, flanked him. Jedediah watched them approach from the window, his face unreadable. Imani stood a little behind him, her hands clasped tightly. The warmth of the stew, the safety of the past 2 days, felt fragile now, threatened by the encroaching judgment. Jedediah opened the door before they could knock. He filled the doorway, a silent, imposing figure. "Thorne," he said, his voice flat. "What business brings you through such weather?" Preacher Thorne, never one for subtlety, stepped forward. "Jedediah Thorne. We've come about the woman. Sarah Jane Washington. It ain't right, her being here with you. It ain't decent. The town won't stand for it." His eyes flicked past Jedediah, trying to catch a glimpse of Imani. "She was caught in the storm," Jedediah stated, his voice a low rumble. "I offered shelter." "As any decent man would shelter," scoffed Amos Henderson, a storekeeper known for his acidic tongue and pious pronouncements. "We know about your shelter, Thorne. Leaving things out on the prairie for her. Corrupting her, no doubt. Or is it she who's corrupted you?" Jedediah's eyes narrowed, but before he could speak, Imani stepped forward, moving to stand beside him. She was no longer the hesitant woman battling logs. Her spine was straight, her gaze direct, meeting Preacher Thorne's without flinching. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but carried a surprising authority. "My name is Imani," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating in the crisp air. "And I have corrupted no one, nor been corrupted. Mr. Thorne offered me refuge from a storm that would have surely claimed me." "Is that your definition of indecency, preacher?" Thorne sputtered, taken aback by her directness. "Woman, you are an outsider here. Your ways are not our ways. Living alone, unchaperoned, and now this. It invites scandal, sin." "The only sin I see," Imani countered, her gaze sweeping over the assembled men, "is the judgment in your hearts. I came to this land seeking peace, to build a home with my own hands on land I purchased legally. I asked nothing of any of you. Yet, you offer only suspicion and condemnation." She paused, her eyes resting on Deputy Miller. "You, Deputy, spoke of concern. Is this concern? Or is it fear?" Fear of what you do not understand. Jedediah placed a hand gently on her arm, a subtle gesture of support. He then addressed the men, his voice still low, but with an edge of steel they hadn't heard in years. This is my land. She is under my protection. If you have a legal warrant, serve it. If not, be on your way. Protection. Preacher Thorne sneered. What kind of protection, Thorne? We all remember Martha. Perhaps your grief has finally addled your mind completely. A flicker of profound pain crossed Jedediah's face, so quick it was almost missed. But Ebony saw it. She saw the cost of Thorne's cruel barb. And something within her, a protective fire, flared. Mr. Thorne was a husband who loved his wife, Ebony said, her voice ringing with conviction. He understands loss. He also understands kindness, a concept that seems foreign to some here. He offered help when no one else would. He left an axe when mine was broken. He left food when mine was gone. He did this without a word, without expectation. He saw a soul struggling and offered a human hand. Is that so wrong in your Christian eyes, preacher? Her words, simple and true, hung in the air. Some of the men shuffled their feet, their gazes dropping. The certainty in Preacher Thorne's eyes wavered for a fraction of a second. He had expected a cowering woman, a broken recluse. He found instead two people, standing together, their quiet dignity a formidable defense. Jedediah spoke again, his voice resonating with a lifetime of unspoken sorrow and newfound resolve. Martha would have done the same. She understood compassion. It seems some of you have forgotten its meaning. He looked directly at Thorne. You will leave my property. Now there was no threat of violence in his tone, but an absolute, unshakable finality. The bluster seemed to drain from Preacher Thorne. He looked at his followers, seeking reinforcement, but found only wavering uncertainty. He had overplayed his hand. With a final, venomous glare at Ebony and Jedediah, he turned. This isn't over, he muttered, but his retreat had begun. The other men followed, their righteous crusade dissolving into a dejected trudge back through the snow. Ebony and Jedediah watched them go, two solitary figures against the vast white landscape, the silence settling around them once more, no longer empty, but filled with an unspoken understanding. The confrontation was over. A new peace, hard won and defiant, began to dawn. He looked at her, truly looked at her, not as a project or a ghost of his past, but as Ebony, the woman who had found her voice, who had stood not just for herself, but for him too. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. She returned it, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. The longing in his heart was still there, but it was no longer just for a wife, for a memory. It was for this. This quiet strength, this shared resilience. This beginning. The cabin still needed finishing. Winter had truly set in. But now, they would face it, and the town, together. He wouldn't just watch her build, he would build with her. And in the mending of her walls, perhaps his own carefully constructed defenses would finally, fully, come down. The land, once a witness to solitary struggle, now held the promise of a shared future, a defiant peace carved out one log, one act of kindness, one courageous word at a time. The smoke from Jedediah's chimney mingled with the promise of smoke soon to rise from Ebony's, two beacons against the encroaching dusk, signals of a found family and earned redemption. Thank you for watching. We hope this story resonated with you. If you enjoyed this narrative, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel for more inspirational stories, and leaving a comment below to share your thoughts. Your support helps us continue to create content that touches the heart and inspires the spirit. We look forward to reading your comments and welcoming you to our community.